My name's Leanne Tran. I'm over in Australia, where I have a private practice. I'm a psychologist and I work with children who are neurodivergent. So whether that be having ADHD or autism, and I support them individually to learn skills, but I also support their parents to know how they can change things in their family so that it's everybody is better off. The neurodivergent child can thrive, parenting is easier, and the whole family runs a little bit smoother. Um, I have for that parent work, I offer online programs and courses. So you don't need to be in this sunny part of the world to access that. And I guess my mission is to have no parents feel like they don't know what they're doing in parenting their kids who are developing differently. So, yeah, that's why I aim to share all the information I do and help people online.
That is amazing work. So, what got you into doing this, and what was the genesis of your journey into this field, and why?
Yeah, it's probably a two, there's a few factors as goes into most stories for how we end up being where we are. But I wanted to be a teacher when I was in school and then around about high school, had this shift that maybe psychology would be better, but I still see it as a bit of a teaching role, but it's rather than about you know, academics or literacy, and it's about life skills and who we are as people. So I really enjoy that teaching component. Um, and then when I finished graduating, I worked with children with cerebral palsy and really resonated with the way they weren't able to always access this, or do the same things at school than that their peers could do. Because when I was young, I had a slight physical difficulty with my hip, and so couldn't do as much as other kids either. And so I think by working with kids who had that similar experience as I did when I was younger, and finding how much joy came from being able to, i- you know, work with those kids to overcome those kind of difficulties and fears by being able to really understand what they were going through has helped me to want to work in that space. And so now it's moved around a little bit to mostly autism and ADHD, but I can still relate to that feeling of things always being a little bit more hard or not quite being able to do things exactly the way others do. And yeah, those are the types of kids that I really want to help.
I have a few friends who have children that have Asperger's
Hmm.
and some other children that are autistic, as well as maybe just children who have more needs than the quote unquote average child. And
Hmm.
one thing that I found common among them is that, well, two things. One, no matter how good your intentions, you aren't ever prepared.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right? And two, there was a little bit of uncertainty in how it would impact their relationship with other people. Do you see sometimes that being a struggle where some parents who are the caregivers of children with special needs or require a little bit more attention, do you see them sometimes struggling with their relationships, maybe romantically or even some of their friendships in their life?
With the parents themselves, do you mean? Yeah, yes, absolutely. I do. I think, I mean, parenting is always something I feel like you cannot ever be fully prepared for, but at least we have a bit of a template for um, parenting from our own childhood. But when our kids have developmental differences that we are truly unprepared for, it makes it a lot harder. So lots of parents talk to me about difficulties with making or their friends, because their friends don't have that same experience and they don't truly understand how difficult it is for parents of a neurodivergent child. So it can be really socially isolating in that way. It can also be hard to make new friends because of just the extra layer of difficulty in family life. When your kids have extra needs, they might have to go to therapy sessions, or they might find it really hard to play in the playground or play dates with other kids. And so it can be isolating from that point of view. It's also one of the most stressful parenting experiences there is, parenting a child who has a disability or a neurodivergence. So that means it impacts relationships and marriages and that kind of thing because of the extra level of stress. So it is a really common experience. And I think in that way, it's parents will often find connection with each other, with parents of other neurodivergent kids, because there's that real shared understanding there.
I think you're absolutely right because it's not easy. I don't have children. It's not easy being a parent. I look at my dog and I'm like, oh my Lord, just raising a dog can be
Yeah, that's hard
difficult.
enough.
That's hard enough, right? And if I
Yep.
had to go to like parent teacher meetings and conferences, I don't know what I would do with myself. But I do know
Hmm.
that some parents who are raising these children, they're some of the strongest and courageous parents that I know. They're so dedicated, so determined. And I
Hmm.
know that sometimes there's some people who may ask, how do they actually do it? They must be so brave and so strong. And then there's some other people in response to that, they'll say that I'm doing what I committed to do as a parent. Because when I became a parent,
Yeah.
this is what
Yeah.
I agreed to do, regardless of how the child came out. But it's interesting, Leanne, to see that there's some parents who are on the outside. They're like, you know what, Leanne? It's better you than me because I don't know if I could do that. Do you see
Yeah.
that side
Yeah.
as well? And if you get that side, like, what would be maybe your feedback or your response to people who have those types of thoughts?
I think when I listen to parents who hear that, they feel a little bit, um, I guess maybe unseen or just disconnected from other parents who say that. Because you're right that, you know, parents of neurodivergent kids just people say, I don't know how you do it. And they think, well, I don't really have a choice. Like, this is just, you know, this is what's happened. This is my family. I have to do it. And so then when people add on all of that virtuous stuff about, well, you're just you're a superhero, you're just so amazing, they often don't feel that way. um and yeah, it does kind of, I guess, brings up maybe feelings of guilt as well, for thinking like I wouldn't if I didn't have to, or all of those things that come up when parents are just trying to adjust to the path that's put before them. um So I think, I mean, yeah, I'm speaking for people that have a different experience to me, but what I hear them say is they would much rather people just try and connect on a regular level about, how things are going, um, rather than comment on their, amazingness or virtuousness of their path.
What has been your experience personally in regards to your situation and how the world has been interacting with you or how you have interacted with the world?
Um, Do you mean just me as a person, or just, any kind of way I want to take that?
Well, yeah, yeah, but even if you want to relate it to like what you would do, was I'll give you an example. Like for me, the more I learn about this, I've noticed that my interaction with the world is a little bit different. Because let's say, for
Mm,
example, 10 years ago when I knew very little, basically what you saw on TV, which isn't the best thing to to see, right? When you try to obtain knowledge, I
yeah.
was very
Yep.
ignorant and maybe I came across that way. Like, how you pick up someone's vibe that they don't really
Mm-hmm.
understand. Where now, let's say all these years later, I've had these conversations. I'm like, okay, I navigate the world a little bit more. Like when I see it out in public, I'm like, okay, you know what? you don't want to overly stare because staring is bad. You don't want to come across as being awkward because they have to deal with that already. Because as you mentioned, it's very isolating to be a part of that community, to be going through it.
Mhm,
So I think so that's what I meant where how you're navigating because you probably are more experienced than the average person when it comes to that.
mhm. Yeah, I see what you mean. I think it's I can see it happening both professionally and personally. And I think professionally, I've learned so much over my career. And I started out before I had kids of my own. And then once I had my own kids, that definitely changed how I interacted with other people, other parents. I realized the advice I was giving was so wildly naive. And so that became a big shift. And I think now working with so many families and seeing that all families are just so different, yet so many of us have things that we're struggling with has really made me try and it's made me a lot more patient, but also it's helped me with the ability to see that other people make different choices than I do. And but usually that's from the same place of love and care for their children. Even if my decision would be wildly different to theirs, I can appreciate that it's kind of coming from the same place. But then also personally, when I see families out in the community, when, maybe shopping or at events or something, and I can see they're struggling, I feel like I really want to try and connect with those parents and just say, yeah, I see you. I know how hard it is. You're doing great. Even by just, a nod or a smile or a roll of the eyes when the kid's having a tantrum on the floor. Um, because it is really isolating when you're in that position as a parent. And so I think it's just that extra empathy and understanding that everybody's trying to do their best and coming from a good place and that it's hard for a lot of people. And it's hard for most of us in our life at some point. We'll go through something difficult. So yeah, it helps a lot to understand that, I think, about, before you judge somebody else.
I think what people have to do, and it goes back to the old rule, right? Like just treat people like you would be treated. And I think that
Yeah.
would, right, protect a lot of people and at least it'll lead to a lot of understanding. There was a time, I'll share
Mm,
a story, Leanne. I was in university. I think it was my second year, and there was someone who was visibly on the spectrum, right? And unfortunately, he was trying to make friends, and there's a group of men, a group of people, young men in the university, who was kind of picking on him
hmm
in a little way and bullying. So what they would do is because he was trying to understand and navigate his life and trying to fit in a little bit because as you mentioned, it's very isolated.
hmm
They would ask him, they would say, hey, so and so, can you carry this for me? So they would get him to carry
Right.
the papers, right? So what they would do is that they would throw the papers on the ground. And then he'd be picking it up to carry it, right? And they're like, oh yeah. So they would go a couple of steps, they'd take it from, then they'd throw it again. So this repeated. And you see this, and it's very heartbreaking because people can be so cruel at times. And
Mm,
sometimes a lot of people who are on the spectrum, they don't understand that's what's happening. The good thing about the story was that there was people that stood up for this young man, including myself, and to say that it's not right. And it goes back to your point where you want to be understanding and as compassionate as possible. No one knows everything on this earth. But if you take it from the
hmm
perspective saying that what I'm about to do to someone, would I want that done to me? Right. And
Yeah.
even,
Yep.
right. And even more so, if the person isn't able to protect themselves or defend themselves, why would you want to take advantage of that just to make maybe yourself or your peer group feel superior in some way? And a lot of times,
Mm.
I think it goes back to education. Do you think that maybe some of the isolation that comes from others is a lack of education, or do you think it's something else?
I think I think it is a lot of the time a lack of education. I think it's also, like you mentioned, maybe lack of empathy or somebody's own internal feelings of not being good enough, where they're trying to, use somebody else to lift themselves up. But it's ironic because in that story that you shared, those people probably were trying to feel big, but all of you around them were not thinking that in that situation. You weren't looking at them thinking those guys are pretty cool and tough. You were probably thinking they weren't very nice people. Um, yeah, so I think it's a combination of not knowing enough and maybe trying to make yourself feel better by how you interact with somebody else. I'm really excited to see in the clients that I see coming through that there's so much more education and understanding now about lots of these things. And it's becoming quite commonplace. So, being in a class where with an autistic person is common enough now that kids will often say to me that they know what autism is, um, and they'll say, "Oh, yeah, there's someone in my class who's autistic, and a couple have ADHD." And so there's right from a young age, there's acceptance, and they've just created relationships with these classmates as they would with any other classmate. And so it's education, but also being familiar, which will lead to that empathy. I think that's a really good outcome. Things have changed a lot since probably you and I were in the first grade. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Like I look at like university, you're probably what in your early 20s. So yeah, a lot of change in the last 10 years, 15 years. I would say a lot has changed probably in the last 5,
Yes. Yeah, I think so
right?
too.
Yeah, like if you look at
Yeah.
right before the global lockdowns and everything, let's say 2018, if you look
Hmm.
at like that world, how we looked at mental health versus how we look at mental health now, two total
Yeah.
different worlds, right? Would you agree?
Yep. Yeah. Yes, I think so. I think the understanding of um, mental health has changed, but also COVID and all of its lockdowns are a great example of how sometimes circumstances are beyond our control and they can have a negative impact on our lives. And that, I think, helped us see each other as other people who we can connect with in some way and who are maybe going through similar things or hardships through circumstances they couldn't control.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
you
So,
put what I've realized to piggyback off of that is that when 2019, 2020, 2021 happened,
mhm.
anyone who was on the fence of mental health was pushed onto the other side of suffering mental health. Like you didn't have the opportunity to pretend or ignore it,
No. Yeah. Yeah.
right? And that comes
That's
like
right.
from your children maybe suffering it, or yourself or your loved one. Like I remember seeing people saying that, oh man, you know what, Train? My child has ADHD. And I'm
Hmm.
just realizing now. I was like, yes. Do you know why? They're like, why, Train? Because you're home and you actually get to pay
Yeah.
attention to your children, right?
Yeah.
Like
Or
how
you may have had to teach them. That's so many families I think were like, "Oh wow, okay, I can see now why yeah, what the teacher's talking about."
yeah, like is that something that you saw with your clients where there was maybe some parents who had blinders on and you're like, no, your child has X, your child has Y. And they're very staunch and they're saying that, you know what, Leanne, nope. I'm gonna go to someone else who's gonna affirm my belief that my child is perfect and they're not going through anything of that. Do you see that as well?
I, I don't see too much of it, and I think the reason though is because if parents are already bringing their child to see me, they're struggling with something in some way. But I think teachers would definitely see that where some parents are saying, "No, it's just how the class is run," or yeah, all kids do that. All boys are like that. He's just not whatever it is. Yeah, there's I think that happens a lot, but probably the ones that already have brought their child to see me are more in line with wanting to get some help. And so sometimes they don't agree either and think, no, it's not ADHD or it's not autism, but we can usually move past that or through that with thinking, well, that doesn't really, as long as you understand your child and you're giving them what they need in order to learn and in order to thrive in the world, it doesn't really matter whether you and I agree on the label. So, yeah, we can usually move through it because parents mostly just want to do what's in the best interest for their child.
I look at that as a very courageous first step because,
Mm,
and this is why I'll say that when I spoke to one of my friends, she's a teacher and she has young students, and there's like a student that's running around. He'll strip off all of his clothes. He runs around naked. The
mhm,
teachers, as you mentioned, they're gathered around there saying that this child is probably suffering from something, right? On the spectrum, ADHD, whatever the case is. And when they bring it to the parents are like, nope, to your point. It's a classroom, it's something else. I spoke to someone who she must be in her late 40s now, and she had ADHD and things like that. She said that her parents thought that she was possessed, right?
right.
Right. You
Yeah.
get the like the old school, right? Because you mentioned the labels, right? So they're thinking, no, it's not
Hmm.
X, it's not Y, it's the
Mm,
devil's in you, right? Because some people they don't mean necessarily anything wrong with it. It's just that's their baseline, right? The baseline is if you are not functioning in the way that I perceive everyone should function, it has to
hmm.
be like an evil spirit,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
So that's
That's
why,
traditionally,
sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
sorry, you go on. I was just going to say that's traditionally what people thought mental health was before we understood it so much. And so, yeah, without that education, people can still have those beliefs.
Yeah, and that's why I say it's like a courageous first step because if I were to think of, let's say, if I had that belief, for me to
Mm,
take my child and step into your office and speak to Leanne, that's a big leap from
yeah.
possession, right,
Yeah.
to
Yep.
accepting it, right? Do you see, am I accurate to say, like, do you see that as like a wow moment when you have these clients, these parents coming to you and they're taking the necessary steps to say that I need help with this, Leanne?
Mm,
Like, how
yep.
courageous and how important is that first step, just showing up and being with someone like you?
Yeah, I think it definitely is. And especially when parents are bringing their children to see me because it's often parents will worry that they just haven't done the parenting right and it's their fault. And there's lots and lots of reasons why they might be afraid to ask for help or feel ashamed about it. So it is a really brave step. Yeah, definitely one of those times, I guess, where, sometimes we can't do things for ourselves, but we can do it for others. And so I see a lot of times parents are overcoming their own fears or beliefs and internal battles to do what they think is going to help their child. And that's absolutely courageous.
My heart breaks for those parents who are unable to make that step, that leap, maybe in some cases where their family is not supportive, or maybe they're a
Mm.
little embarrassed, or there's a little shame. What advice would you give to someone who's dealing with the shame and embarrassment, who maybe think that they played a role in their child going through this journey?
I would say that, I mean, chances are it's not just your parenting and what you've done. Chances are it's also other factors. But by understanding it is what lets you then be able to change how you do things for your child. Um, there's there's no real downside to asking for help about this stuff because even if everything is going okay and it's just that parenting is particularly hard for you at the moment, the worst that happens is you get a little bit of reassurance and somebody can set you on the right path or reassure you that you're already on the right path. Um, there's really no downside to it. I think, parenting is really tough. We don't know what to do. There's no manual for it. There's so much information out there, though, that it can be really hard for parents to wade through it and work out, what they need in that moment. And if somebody can just help you because they've talked to 100 other parents in exactly the same position that you're in, then I'd say it's worth taking a chance at getting that help.
I think so as well. And one thing I love that you shared is the power that the parents have. And one thing I want to do is I want to take a quote that you shared where I was going through your social media, and this is something that I've said myself, and to see it posted by you, I absolutely loved it, where it said that parents hold a
Hmm.
uniquely powerful position in their children's lives. They are the first teachers, the primary role models, and the constant source of love and support. A parent's actions, words, and attitudes can profoundly shape a child's character, beliefs, and future. I absolutely love that because there's so many elements of that I've shared in my life. But talk about how important that quote is, that train of thought, and ultimately that attitude.
Yeah, I think sometimes because we're going through our regular life and we have our kids as well, we can kind of forget that we are the center of their universe, really, and the center of their world. And so it is a really powerful position. Children learn more from their parents in the first few years of their life than they'll learn from, you know, anything else, really, because it shapes who they are as people, how they have those core life skills like being able to handle emotions, um, being able to communicate and form and fall in love with other people as well, because parents are that first kind of template of what a loving relationship is. So the amazing thing to me, though, is most of it happens by just being with your child. You don't have to be doing things intentionally to be able to teach them this stuff. Just by being with them and having the relationship with them, they learn it all from you, just naturally, because that's how we're designed to be as humans. Um, but why I like to really highlight how powerful parents are is because sometimes parents think that psychologists or other professionals might be the expert and know more than they do. And I would say that we know a lot about literature and research and that kind of thing. And so we can help you apply it to your child. But really, it's what parents do in their child's life that's going to make a much bigger impact than what a psychologist will.
It's like, I guess the analogy would be like the captain of a ship. Like you help them with the
Yeah, that's
directions,
right.
right? But they're still navigating and controlling the rough and dangerous waters at times.
Yes, and doing all of that hard work with the sails and the ropes and all that stuff, like constantly running off their feet. But you're right. It's psychologists might see kids for an hour a week or a fortnight, but parents are there for the rest of the time. And we can help give, say, for example, if it's about a child who's got trouble sleeping or with anxiety, we can give you some information and advice about how to think about that and some skills or tools you can use. But it's up to parents then they're the ones who are putting that into place and reassuring their child just before bedtime or before they have to go to school. So, yeah, it's um, it's it's such a big responsibility, but it's also such a privilege to be able to provide that loving relationship for your children that's going to um, really just set the scene for the rest of their life. It's amazing.
When they come to you, what are some of the strategies that you share with them so they can have a successful um, outcome when it comes to raising children in this way?
I think I always advise to try to have a really strong relationship with your kids. And that's through spending quality time with them, but also being able to listen to um, what they're trying to communicate with you. But that so that kind of sets the foundation, I think. Then I talk about how it's a much better way to go is to try to promote positive behavior and encourage your kids to do well and reward or reinforce them for doing that than to try to always focus on punishments and discipline. Because that's probably what I would suggest people spend like 5% of their energy on, whereas 95% of it is on having a good relationship and um, encouraging your kids to act in the way you'd like them to. I spend a lot of time talking with parents whose kids have ADHD or are autistic about how they can adapt their parenting to do stuff a little bit differently. And that's because ADHD brains and autistic brains are a little bit different as well. So um, the most common things are probably to have lots of visual information around your home instead of just always talking, so that kids can refer back to things on, for example, a calendar of what they've got to do and charts and lists, so that they don't have to keep all that information in their brain. Um, and so, yeah, visual supports is a big one. The other ones are things like trying to make time visible for kids as well, with using countdown timers and all of that kind of stuff. So they can understand how much time has passed. And so they know what's coming up next. And a good example for that is like how long is left on the iPad before you have to do something else. Um, and then yeah, trying to reduce the memory load by making lists and lots of, the things that we would usually do as adults to help ourselves get through our work week by using calendars and to-do lists and reminders, but we don't we sometimes take for granted how much our kids can do. Um, and in ADHD and autism, executive functioning is a difficulty, and that really is the part of the brain that's organizing. Um, it's the brain's kind of command center, or the section where it's about kind of, well, really, executive means doing. So it's about doing stuff in the moment. And so the more you can support your kids with that, the easier their life will be, the better they'll feel. Um, and then the smoother the family will run. That's it in about 30 seconds, where it might take weeks or months to go through this with a family.
The people I spoke to that's in a similar industry as you, or maybe the same industry, they say the same thing. They're saying that more than half the battle is just showing up,
Hmm.
be there for your child, right? In a way that they need you. And I wonder, because I look at my parents and I look at if I were to become a parent, and then I look at maybe some people who are my age in their 30s who are parents. And it's interesting how so many of us remember what we don't like about our childhood,
Yes. Yeah.
right? But when you ask them what do they do, like there's a little bit of a struggle. Similar like when you're dating, right? Oh, I don't want a guy that's like this. I don't want a girl that's like that. But then when you ask them what do they want, they're like, well, I don't know, Leanne, help me, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
So they will be able to identify what they don't like. But then when they're raising their own children, it seems like they sometimes forget what they didn't like. And then some of them repeat to their own
Yeah.
children what they didn't like. And I wonder if it's simply maybe coming from a place of being humble and say that I need to make sure that my child is set up for success. So if I do
Hmm.
need to go to a Leanne, I'm going to go to a Leanne. It's not about me and my
Hmm.
ego and those around me.
Hmm.
It's what does my child need? What does my child want? What can I do to provide better for this child? When they get
Yeah.
to you, Leanne, and they're still having, sorry, before they get to you, and there's some people who are still having some difficulty saying that I don't know if this is for my child, right? Those who are
Hmm.
on the fence, because you're gonna have people that's gonna be like, you know what? No, this is demonology. It's almost Halloween. The spirits are possessing both of us. That's fine. You probably can't reach those people, right? The people that are on the fence who are saying that I want to do better for my child, but I just don't know. How
Mm.
do we reach them, in your opinion?
I think I do a lot of reflection with parents. And so a lot of that is about saying, what you're right in that if people sometimes they can't remember what they liked about growing up. And then they might remember the things they don't like. So they want to avoid that in their parenting. But without an alternative, it's really hard not to just slip into what we experienced as a child. So I think I'd encourage parents to reflect on what they like about their own parenting now and what they don't like about it. And that is, if there are things that you don't like about it, we can help you find or adjust your parenting to be more in line with how you'd like it to be.
Do you think that would be something that is difficult for some people to not only do, but maybe admit?
Yeah, I think so. There is a lot of, it can be difficult to admit, and it's usually because of the difference between what we aim to be and then what we see ourselves being now. We're not living up to our own ideals about parenting, then yeah, that's where the shame lives in that little space.
And shame has been used to discourage so many people from doing so many things. Like I put myself in a parent's shoes and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go see Leanne because I want to do this. And you tell someone, but just like anything else in life, right? You tell the wrong person, and that
Hmm.
person brings you from such a enthusiastic high to now a disappointing low. And you're like, oh, my neighbor doesn't have to do this. Oh, the couple at work don't have to do this. What is
Mm.
wrong with me? Maybe I shouldn't see Leanne today, right?
Yeah, to those parents, I would say, but maybe those other people should. You don't assume that they've got it all together and that that they're better than you, because lots of the time, the people who don't want to really consider their own parenting or reflect on it are the ones who do need to and should be doing things differently. I think it's always good to get help for either your own mental health or for someone else in your family. There should never be shame in that. I think, yeah, don't assume that they're better than you is my advice, because often the people who don't want to talk about it are the ones who really should.
So, Leanne, as we close today, what advice do you want to give those who want to avoid the shame and avoid thinking that there's other parents who are better than them because they're not going through um, a therapist or a coach or someone like you to help them along their way with their parenting?
I think I would say that there's lots of parenting information out there, but research shows that, you know, whatever parenting style you use based on, a book that you've read or something like that, it doesn't really make much difference in terms of how your children grow and their outcomes. So there's no real wrong way to do parenting aside from obviously abuse and neglect. But if there's some things that you want to learn that could benefit your child, then don't let other people kind of put you off that, and think about it in terms of uh, uh, maybe like coaching or something. All the best sports people have coaches, and so if there's somebody who can be serve as a coach role to your parenting, then it's not necessarily about you doing it wrong, but what if you could do it better and your child will benefit from that?